It was just another day in Phil's life. He'd had a long day at work, and all he wanted to do was take his shoes off, sit on the sofa, and watch his favourite soaps with a can of beer. But before he could do that, his dog, Benson, needed to go for a walk. So he headed to the park and decided to play a game of ball. But as he was playing, he tripped, fell, and smashed his head against the concrete of the pavement. As he was bleeding, another dog walker called 999. But Phil never made it home that night, or ever again. He died in the ambulance on the way to hospital. Dave had recently retired. He'd spent 50 years working as an accountant and was looking forward to spending his retirement in the garden, reading the paper and seeing his grandchildren. One day, his wife, June, decided to pop to the shops for a while, so Dave took the opportunity to mow the lawn. He got to the awkward bit, by the petunias, when he felt a pain in his chest. The pain was his heart. He fell, went into unconsciousness. A few hours later, June returned home from doing the shopping. She put on the kettle, made a cup of tea, and headed outside to the garden to see her husband. But it was too late. Dave had already died. Katie was having a tough summer. It was the middle of her A-levels, and she really wasn't enjoying them very much. But she was looking forward to a long summer spent with her friends before university. The night before her final A-level history exam, she decided to take an hour off and have a pizza with her big sister. She went to bed as usual, and the next morning her mum shouted her downstairs saying that breakfast was ready. But she never came downstairs. Her mum found her in bed. She had died in her sleep. As a funeral director, I am faced with the brutal reality of death every single day. In my line of work, there is no escaping the fact that we are all going to die. The evidence is in the mortuary. Every morning I go into work and the smell of death hits me. My phone rings because someone has died and my assistance is required. Heart attacks, mystery illnesses, terrorist incidents, murders, suicides, car crashes, tragic accidents, even simple hospital procedures gone wrong. On average, 1,000 people die in London every single week. That's a lot of people who just don't have a tomorrow. Inspired by all these funerals, I very quickly got into the habit of saying, this could be the last time. As inspired as I was, my boyfriend at the time even had my words tattooed onto his arm in my handwriting. But as a funeral director, I'm not only faced with the brutal reality of death, it's also the brutal reality of life. My job is to support people who are in the midst of going through what is possibly the most difficult, devastating, and traumatic time of their life, and so I see how it affects them. So lying in bed one night, I added something to my boyfriend's arm. This could be the last time, his tattoo said, but it probably won't, I added in biro. You see, Phil, who never came home after his walk in the park, was survived by his wife, his neighbours, and his dog Benson. Dave, who retired only to have a heart attack and die, was survived by his wife, his children, their children, his nieces and nephews, the people he'd worked with for over 50 years, the men he drank with at the pub, and everyone he knew to say hello to, including the milkman. And Katie, whose death remains unexplained to this day, was survived by her sister, her parents, her grandparents, her school friends, her netball team, and absolutely everyone who knew her online really quite well but had never met her. All of these people had a tomorrow, and it was a tomorrow they had to find a way to live with. Now, I've learned so much from these people about how dealing with the very difficult emotions around death can really transform our lives. Up until the age of 25, I had never even attended a funeral, so I was totally overwhelmed when my granddad was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I had to face the prospect of my first ever death. I spent 18 months anticipating how it was going to feel, expecting a deep darkness like depression. But grief came in many shades. It wasn't just darkness. There was joy, gratitude, sadness, and anger in there as well. I soon realized that grief was so much more overwhelming, unpredictable, and complicated than I ever could have imagined. Everyone's reaction to death is very different, and whatever you're feeling, it is okay. Now, after Phil's very sudden and tragic death, I spent some time with his widow, Angela, planning his funeral. We wasted 30 years of our life, she told me. We just spent our time bickering and arguing about everything and absolutely nothing, and now he is gone, and I have to spend the rest of my life knowing that we wasted our time together. I never get another opportunity. Her neighbour Barbara tried very hard to console her. She said, "Oh, Angie, you've just got to stop crying. This can't go on. You've got to get on with your life. You've got to see the good things. You've got to celebrate all the good things that you did together. And, don't sit around moping over him. He wouldn't want you wasting your tears. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay." In my early 20s, when depression led me to not wanting to be here anymore, I was so used to people telling me not to be so silly, that I had everything to live for, and that I should be feeling something, in fact, anything, apart from the reality of what I was actually feeling. One day, a friend took me for a walk in the park. She let me talk without interrupting, and at the end, she simply nodded and said, "I totally get why you would want to leave. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay." Diminishing other people's feelings or telling them how they should and shouldn't be feeling doesn't help, even if it's well-intentioned. Now, another thing that I've learned from the many people I've worked with is that owning what is going on and saying it as it is really valuable. So when I first started working in funerals, I would arrive at someone's house, knock on the door, introduce myself, wonder whether to take my shoes off or not, and then wonder how on earth I was going to express my condolences for what had happened to them, sounding genuine, sincere, and honest, which I was, but it's very difficult to word. So what I would do is say something which I felt was right, such as, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," or "Sorry about your husband," and then pause and wait for their reaction. And their reactions were always very interesting and very telling. One was, "It is what it is." Another was, "Oh well, never mind," followed by a grief-struck look into the distance. And another was just, "Oh, thanks, love, cup of tea?" But now my approach is much more direct than that. "I'm so sorry that your sister Katie has died. I'm sorry that this terrible thing has happened to you and your family." By owning what has happened, by saying it as it is, we give everyone else permission to do the same. Unlike most of the British funeral industry, I don't talk in euphemisms. No one in my care is lost. No one has passed away. No one is sleeping or at rest. I use the words death, dying, died, and dead, although very gently. No one is called the deceased. I call them the person who's died, or, controversially, their actual name. By saying things as they are, we're able to own them, and because of that, actually deal with them. Very early on, I realized that grief even doesn't just belong to death. Grief is the complex set of emotions we feel whenever we are faced with a situation which we probably don't want to be in. We're either anticipating a situation, it's happening, or something is going to happen, and we have to find a way to live with that. Now, grief we don't just feel grief when someone has died. Grief also belongs to any kind of change. The end of a relationship, the end of a friendship, a career falling apart, a pet dying, a grandparent dying is a very key one. The lives we could have lived, the people we could have been, the places we could have gone, the people we could have known, the one who left, the one who stayed, the life we could have lived if only life didn't get in the way, the ex-boyfriend with your words permanently tattooed on his arm. The list is endless. As a society, we don't really have any way of dealing with grief. Our funerals tell us to diminish how we're feeling, to keep calm, and to carry on. June could barely pour me a cup of tea. She was shaking so much when I went to her house to talk about Dave's funeral. Her hand was shaking so much she couldn't sign the cremation paperwork which was needed for his funeral to go ahead. "I'm really sorry, I'm just terrible at funerals," she said to me. "It's okay, it's a funeral, you're not supposed to be good at it." Our funeral poetry tells us to diminish how we're feeling. It tells us not to feel what it is we're really feeling. We're supposed to smile, laugh, and just get on with our lives. We're absolutely not to cry, shed any tears, and God forbid you stand at anyone's grave and weep. We're told that life goes on, and that everything will be just the same as it always was. But when someone dies, everything changes. Pain demands to be felt, and if we don't feel it, it will find a way to leak out into the rest of our lives. Alcoholism, addiction, pills, breakdowns, workaholism, the list is endless. Bereavement is what happens to us, grief is what we feel, and mourning is what we do. Now, I do my mourning on Instagram. If you ever want to know how I'm feeling, then just check out my Instagram account. You won't find any pictures of kittens or latte art, but you will find a very real depiction of my inner emotional landscape in pixel form. I don't repress my grief, I express it. And by doing so, over time, it's changed, and it's just not so crippling anymore. As a society, we need a modern way of mourning. We need funerals that actually serve their purpose. We need funeral poetry that lets us feel what we're really feeling without telling us otherwise. We need to know that it's okay to cry in the frozen peas aisle of Tesco. We need to know that it's okay not to be okay. And we need permission to do whatever it is until we don't need to do it anymore. By repressing our grief, we rob ourselves of the opportunity not just to treat life and death with reverence, acceptance, gratitude, and many things, but to do the same with our emotions. Our funerals are important. They are our emotional legacy. If done well, they give the people who survive us a space to feel and to accept and acknowledge that their lives will never be the same again. The most powerful funeral I was ever involved with was for a lady who died very suddenly in a car crash. Now, her husband decided that he didn't have any words to express how he felt about her death. So at the funeral, we didn't have any words. The only sound was the wind rustling in the trees and birdsong as her coffin was lowered into the grave. There might not have been any words, but the emotional volume was deafening. Even though I work with death every single day, it's not realistic to truly live the life that I want to live every single moment, dealing healthily and brilliantly with every difficult emotion that comes up. But I can live a life dealing with what comes up when it happens, making decisions which won't negatively affect tomorrow whilst also knowing that if I don't have a tomorrow, I won't regret how I spent today. Because this could be the last time, but it probably won't be. Thank you.